I see second grade. The first and second grade school. Been there long enough now. I've taught my whole family.
Okay.
I have three girls that all have kindergarten.
Bueno, gracias Rodolfo por hacerlo y a ver si me puedes ayudar con la Havdalah también ahora. ¿Okay?
Claro que sirve.
Se le agradece muchísimo.
Right on the main
Previous bat mitzvah course.
sometimes
this is what I'm just going to doing. I took it fast, so there's no water.
That is amazing.
the big walls, the appliances.
Looks like your husband starts getting awesome.
I made it to one can.
That was cheap.
So a gallon of water.
Okay, fellas, would like to give us
I stayed in
1 minute more, a few minutes more. Okay, we 7 o'clock. We're gonna have to figure that one out, but
Are those mine?
no,
There.
Try the other side. Gotta find a spot.
Anybody has any triangles?
He's so happy.
You're also one down.
Just wanted to make sure. Yeah.
I got the graduate school.
And it's a pity, Ty's not around as a voice.
Right, exactly. Well, so this is gonna happen now. We're gonna have Havdalah briefly, and then we're gonna hear from lights.
We can do it
Okay, we're gonna hear from Summer Ferrar, who is our, I think she's our newest, no, she's not our newest temple member, right? Have you?
Yes. Yeah, yes.
A newer one, huh? And we.
You want modifier?
Yeah.
Just put that on the stove.
Need to get this box.
Well, somebody just ate the box.
Here, there we go. We found it. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Hey, could you do me a favor?
Okay, if anybody wants a prayer book.
I'll pass them around. Yeah.
Okay, page 414.
Len, you're upside down.
I know, Len is upside
I know
down.
it. I can't change it.
Or
Oh.
husband.
Are you getting busy?
It's-
I want to auntie and uncle Ty type of relationship.
It should just be so lucky. Wow, we're on page 414 for those who are following. If you're online, Rodolfo kindly is showing on the screen the service, which we appreciate very, very much. And then we need people in prayer books, page 14. There more?
Yes.
Good. Our ancestors took words from scripture to voice their thanks to God, sustains us from week to week. Within the ancient words of praise, we find prayer for life and health in the week to come. May their faith be ours as well, as we make their prayers our own. הנה לישועתי אפתח ולא אפחד, כי עזיבה זמרתיה, ויהי לי ישועה, ושפתם מים וששון ממי הישועה, אדוני ישועה, לענך ברכתך סלע, אדוני צבאות עמנו משגב לנו אלוהי יעקב סלע, אדוני צבאות אשר ידם פותח בה, אדוני יושיע מלך עינינו ביום קוראנו, ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ואיתן, כן תהיה לנו, כוס ישועות אשא, בשם אדוני אקרא. Behold, God is my help, trusting the Eternal One, I'm not afraid, for the Eternal One is my strength, it has become my guiding presence. With joy we draw water from the well of salvation. The Eternal One brings deliverance and blessing to the people. The God of the hosts of heaven is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. How blessed is the one who trusts in you. Be with us, Eternal One. Answer us when we call upon you. Give us light and joy, gladness and honor, as in the happiest of days of our people's past. Then shall we lift up the cup to rejoice in your guidance and call out to you in praise. The Kiddush gladdens our heart, and this gladness will look beyond the ugliness and misery that face our world. May our eyes always be open to unnoticed beauty and to blessings yet to be recognized. May we be ever mindful of our promise to help repair the brokenness of our world. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei v'ri'ah. We praise eternal God, creator of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. The added soul that Shabbat is said to confer is living us now. The fragrance of these spices lift our spirits at the moment of the departing. It reminds us that the next 6 days also will pass and Shabbat will return. The bouquet makes us young with thankful hearts for the sweetness of rest and the fragrance of growing things. Fragrance. We are grateful for the dream of a world healed from pain, pure and whole, as on the first Shabbat when God rested from the work of having made our world. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei besamim. We thank you, eternal God, creator of the universe, who creates the world. Now, pass it on. And then that's exactly how the ritual is done. Shabbat now departs. The workday begins as we behold the flame, that flame. We thank God for the energy and talent by which we turn Earth's raw material into things of use and beauty. The candle's double wick reminds us that all qualities are paired. We have the power to create many different fires, some useful, others harmful. And we never use our powers to do harm to our world. In these fires we kindle the holy ones, that we may bring light and warmth to all humanity. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh. And then
Like the Statue of Liberty.
and hold it very high. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, ben or lechoshech, ben yom hashvi'i lesheshet yemei ha'maseh. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. We praise eternal God, creator of the universe, who enables us to distinguish the commonplace from the sacred. We create light and darkness, the seventh day of rest and the 6 days of labor. We praise you, God, who calls us to separate the ordinary from the sacred. Thank you, God, for the day of Shabbat that now concludes, for the blessings of peace and joy, bodily rest and spiritual refreshment. We are thankful. May Shabbat's influence accompany us into the new week, sanctifying all our activities and inspiring us to work with spirit renewed. May the day come when harmony and peace shall be embraced by all people. Thank you. מבדיל בין קודש לקודש לחול, חטאותינו נמחול, צערנו וכספנו ירבה ירבה כחול ככוכבים בלילה. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. Now we finish in 419 with the now one of the Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Artishti, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Agilati, Eliyahu Banaynu, Yavo Elenu, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Artishti, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Agilati. What of the book? Now, Now comes the most challenging part, because we have a speaker who I know and thank you all of you guys, who is ready to speak with us. And I think we owe her all our attention that summer. So I know you guys here may want to talk among yourselves, but some of us at least here will be listening.
So if you
Summer.
don't shut up, we smack you.
That's what I meant to say.
That's what we need to.
Good. Hey, Summer, how are you? Lenny is already upside down for you.
Hi.
Hi, we want to hear everything you have
Just
to say.
turn
How
your
are you?
telephone over.
You put it on speaker view.
Oh.
Here. Speaker view somewhere.
Maybe, wait. Is it here or is it?
The
No, that's
speaker
switch
view.
camera.
On
Maybe
speaker
here.
view.
Wait, maybe here? There. Is that?
Is that him?
No, that's, wait.
That's speaker view, but
Yeah.
the problem is he's speaking.
Okay, you need to speak now, Summer. Say something.
Summer,
Hi. Hi,
Okay,
everybody.
that's her. Okay,
Can
good.
you hear me?
Yes,
We
if
good?
everybody else could mute themselves, would be lovely. So that we get
Okay.
to hear Summer, because we never hear her talk. We only see her. So tell us everything we need to know, Summer.
I will. Okay. I'm going to share my screen here in just a second. Let me figure out how to do this.
And so that you know, this is part of a monthly program Temple Israel does. Next month, at a date to be decided in April, we're going to have Edgar Lozano from Neiva, Colombia. Edgar was a Catholic priest, not even your average Catholic priest. He was like a guy like to be bishop, and then he decided to become Jewish, and against my best advice, he did it. Okay. But that Summer, she's not a priest.
I'm not. I'm going to share my screen here. Can everybody see that screen that says Midwest Innocence Project up
Yeah.
on the right, and then Innocence Work?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thank you, Rabbi, and thank you everybody at Temple Israel for inviting me to speak to you tonight. I'm Ferrar, I'm a new member, and I'm also, in my day job, the project manager at the Midwest Innocence Project in Kansas City. And I like to start with this quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes that says, "One's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimensions." And so some of the things that we talk about in the context of innocence work and wrongful convictions are, it's a difficult subject matter. And so I'd like to invite you as my spiritual community to consider new solutions when we're discussing shortcomings in our criminal justice system. And when I say systemic shortcomings, I'm talking about a person going to prison for a crime they didn't commit. And like I said, it takes a lot of courage to examine this. And really, I think going to prison for something you didn't do is for a lot of us, a nightmare scenario. So after we talk about some of the causes of wrongful convictions, we'll talk about some solutions too, and hopefully that's where some of the creativity comes into play. But you know, this is informal and it's taking place after, you know, an event that's already in progress. Please, if you have a question, feel free to unmute or a comment, and I will try to be mindful of the time too as we go. So what we do at Midwest Innocence Project is we are a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the investigation, litigation, and exoneration of wrongfully convicted people in our 5-state region. Studies estimate that between 2 and 7% of all incarcerated people were falsely convicted. And that means that somewhere between 2,000 and 7,000 people in Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, and Arkansas are incarcerated for crimes they didn't commit. Midwest Innocence Project is part of a greater network of innocence projects. We're an affiliate of the National Innocence Network. The first project was started in New York City. It's all over the country and really internationally as well. So the last time I checked these statistics was Thursday afternoon. At that time, there were 2,754 exonerations since 1989. And that is more than 24,590 years lost. That doesn't include when defendants take a plea, a lesser plea, or a deal offered after a new trial's been granted. Doesn't include misdemeanors. So when we're looking at cases to try to understand what happens when somebody is wrongfully convicted, we find the following elements. There's informants, police or prosecutor misconduct, an eyewitness identification, false or misleading forensic science, or confession. We've seen those contributing factors in most wrongful convictions. And the first one we'll talk about is eyewitness misidentification. So right now that's present in 28% of wrongful convictions. So the person on the right is a former client of Midwest Innocence Project, convicted in Johnson County, Kansas in 1999. The incident involved a purse snatching in a Walmart parking lot. The victim fought back and the perpetrator got away with her cell phone. Witnesses were shown a lineup where none of the other options except our client, Mr. Jones, fit the description the witness provided, so they had no other option but to pick him. He was sentenced to 30 years for that crime, and he wrongfully spent 18 years in prison for that. And this is a picture of how he looks now. The person on the left is the actual perpetrator, and Mr. Jones is the person on the right. So you can see how easy it was to mistake them. Another element we find in wrongful convictions are incentivized informants. So that's somebody who's been paid to testify or testified for their own release from prison. Sometimes having testified in multiple cases that they've overheard confessions, I heard my cellmate confess, or that they've witnessed multiple crimes. Informants themselves are often pretty desperate people, and if they're not in prison already, they want to avoid being charged with the crime, and cooperating in this manner, implicating somebody else, might be their only option. Another thing that we find are confessions that turn out to be false. And so there's always this question, why, if you didn't do it, why would you confess? I think that's what most people think. Why would you confess to something you didn't do? And we find that reasons include duress, coercion, intoxication, diminished capacity, mental impairment, ignorance of the law, fear of violence, the infliction of actual harm or the threat of a harsh sentence, misunderstanding the situation. So we've found these in about 12% of cases where DNA has exonerated somebody. At one point, the defendant in the case made incriminating statements or outright confessed. And the mental state of a person who's giving a confession is sometimes an issue. So we know that confessions from juveniles, for instance, are unreliable because they might think that they're going to get to go home as soon as they admit guilt. Some people want to please authority. I can certainly relate to that. Or they think they can confess and get out of the situation, get out of the room, and their innocence will be proven later. And what happens, unfortunately, is that it's powerful evidence used to convict them. So I'm going to give some case examples here. This is George Allen Jr. He was actually a client from Innocence Project. He confessed because he was convinced by the police that there was evidence against him, and so he thought it was futile to claim innocence, and he thought he had no other choice but to confess. And he was convicted of murder, rape, sexual assault, burglary, and unlawful entry. The victim was a young 30-something court reporter from St. Louis. and she'd been stabbed to death, found in her home. The alternative suspect had recently been released from prison after serving time for rape, and he was seen in the area near the victim's apartment. His brother lived in her building, and he disappeared shortly after the murder. And Mr. Allen, who was convicted for this crime, was a diagnosed schizophrenic. He was picked up by police because he resembled the suspect. And during his interrogation, Mr. Allen confessed, and he told the detective that he also told the detective that he was mentally ill, that he was intoxicated at the time of the interrogation, and that he was innocent. He lived 10 miles from the victim, and this crime took place during the middle of a snowstorm with 20 inches of snow. So unlikely that he made that 10-mile journey, and no physical evidence connected him to the crime. So eventually he was fully exonerated. In 2010, his attorneys found documents that had never been seen before, police and lab reports that had eliminated Mr. Allen as a suspect. They found out witnesses had been hypnotized, and there were 7 fingerprints from the crime scene that weren't his. So in 2012, a judge wrote about the case. Most critically, the undisclosed evidence considered altogether points unavoidably to the conclusion that police ignored and hid evidence pointing to someone else as the perpetrator in their zealous pursuit of Mr. Allen's conviction. So sometimes these different elements are interlocking together. It's not necessarily just one thing that causes someone to be wrongfully convicted. So in Mr. Allen's case, we have his confession that was false, and then this misconduct on the part of the officials in the case playing into it. Another example, a former MIP client, Lamont McIntyre, there's police and prosecutor misconduct in his case. It was a double homicide in Kansas City, Kansas from 1994. Mr. McIntyre was 17 at the time, and he was with his family in another part of town when the crime occurred. And police spent less than 20 minutes interviewing witnesses in his case. The prosecutor elicited some false testimony, and the detective, one of the detectives in the case, had a network of informants that were very vulnerable people that he'd been exploiting. Then in October of 2017, we had an evidentiary hearing on a cascade of evidence of police and prosecutorial misconduct. So the current district attorney, Mr. Mark Dupree, announced that the prosecutor agreed that Mr. McIntyre's conviction should be vacated. So he was exonerated at that time, or after charges were dismissed by Mr. Dupree. Mr. McIntyre was exonerated and freed after 23 years in prison. How are we doing? Is everybody hearing okay? Do we have any questions so far or any comments? Cool.
I have a question, Summer.
Yes.
The very first man that you showed who was accused of assaulting a woman and taking her purse, was his real offense that he stole her purse? Was there more of an accusation than just that? It could be because he got 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Stealing a purse?
The sentencing, and this is a part of the process that I am the least informed about, sentencing rules and laws, but those are, that kind of a sentence for that kind of a crime is, in and of itself, insane.
Yeah.
And, that's, I can't see how that would be a just outcome for that kind of a crime. But as sentencing rules and laws and all that is a topic that I'd like to get more informed about. I think would be helpful in understanding how some of this stuff happens.
You find that most of your clients are people of color?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would say that the people of, let me put it this way, people of color are disproportionately represented in wrongful convictions.
How do you decide which cases you'll take? Because most people in prison would probably say they were, were innocent. What kind of, preponderance of evidence do you have to have before you take on a case? Because these last for years and cost a lot of hours and a lot of money. So how do you make your selections?
We have, I think, to the first point, based on the estimates that we have about, between 2,000 and 7,000 people in our area of practice, we think are wrongfully convicted. We don't have near that many people ask us for help. So from a numbers perspective, I wouldn't say that we can necessarily say that everybody makes an innocence claim, whether they are or aren't. And so that's one thing that we factor in. And the criteria that we have in a nutshell is that you have to have more than 10 years left on your sentence, because it can take that long to exonerate somebody. It's a very lengthy process. We can't help somebody if they're saying that they were that they did it, but they were intoxicated or they were insane. That we can only help people that say that are factually actually innocent. So they weren't there. It's not an issue of consent, anything like that. It's a very specialized set of criteria in that regard.
And the examples you've shown, even if they were guilty, the sentences just seem insane. And I think of the boy in Texas that caused the death of eight people, and because he was a victim of getting way too much, too young. I can't remember what they called it. He was sent home on probation. Of course, he violated his probation, and then he and his mother ran off to Mexico, and they had to hunt them down and bring them back. But it was so close to his 21st birthday that he only did a few months, of the sentence, and even the people that lived were so severely, damaged that they would never ever have a normal life. Not to mention the ones that died. And then you have somebody that got 30 years for purse snatching. Even if he had been guilty, 30 years, that's unconscionable. And then so many people in our area that have gotten life sentences, for having a small amount of pot on them, and other people, they just call their parents to come and pick them up. So you see a lot of disparages like that. That's horrendous.
Yes. Yeah.
Over the years, sentences have been legislated. There's been legislation on top of legislation, so that in many instances, when it comes time for a judge to impose a sentence, he or she is hamstrung by the law. The law requires, if someone is convicted of crime X, there is likely a law that says you must sentence this person to Y.
And then the mandatory 3 law, I'm not sure that's been removed or not, but it didn't matter how minor the cases were. If it was your 3rd time, you went away forever.
I have a question.
Yes.
The cases where the prosecutors or the police were found to have, whatever the word is, when they were at fault, what kind of repercussions have they suffered?
I think I don't know in every case the outcome for each individual actor in the process. I will say that from what I've seen and in my experience, there often aren't consequences that I would consider to be thorough enough. So
no, it's not.
So I think one of the ways in which we can hold more officials accountable is to pay attention in our local prosecutors races for county attorney and things of that nature, and to ask questions of our officials in that capacity about how their office would deal with things like wrongful conviction, and what implements they've put in place to prevent their office from convicting innocent people.
Excuse my upside down presentation.
That's okay.
I can't fix it. But
That's all right.
What is the motivation of these prosecutors and police people to find of a victim, and why do they have to find a victim as quickly as they seem to do? What motivates them?
Increase their prosecution rate.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And some of it's personal, like the case in Kansas City, Kansas, where the young man was convicted at 17. He had a history with this detective, and this detective apparently was notorious for making people, have sex with him, or else he would prosecute them or somebody in their family. And this young man's mother had been hiding from this detective, and so when there was a murder, he made sure that the son got convicted and was sent away for 30 years. He's the one that was recently, well, within the last couple of years, released, and he's gone to Barber College, and now he is helping other people with his money, because he is probably the first one in Kansas City, Kansas, that got a cash settlement, because it was against the law in Kansas for there to be any monetary, remunerance for false claims and false convictions. But somehow they managed to give him several $1 million, and now he is doing barber training for people who have just gotten out of prison, so they'll have an occupation. And also I think he's very active with the Innocence Project. I've seen him at several talks.
Thank you, Joyce. That's a great example. And I think, as you mentioned, there is this, a need to look or to come across as tough on crime, and also to secure a conviction. And I think, the range of motives can be a whole spectrum depending on who and what the circumstances are. And I think that there are instances where I could imagine that there would be instances where the prosecutor might think that they have the right person, but have to cut some corners in order to convict them. And it's in that corner cutting that a lot of these errors happen. But as we understand wrongful convictions more, I think the more they're uncovered and the more we learn about them, the more systemic problems we find, rather than, I think, necessarily bad apples. But to based on the example, of course, that Joyce referenced, there are some, for sure. And we'll do some more slides, but please unmute and ask anytime you have a question, and we can discuss a little bit more at the end too, if there's time. Another contributing factor to wrongful convictions are flawed forensic science. This is a former client of ours, Mr. Rodney Lincoln. He was wrongfully convicted for the murder of a woman and an attack on her 2 daughters in St. Louis in 1982. So the question about forensic science is the science itself is what happens at the crime lab when an analyst compares a sample from a crime scene to a sample from a suspect. And that can be firearms, that can be bite marks, shoe impressions, tire impressions, fingerprints, hair, all of those kinds of things. The issue with forensic science is that we don't have an underlying set of data that tells us how often 2 hairs or 2 tires or 2 fired bullets that look the same have actually come from different sources. So in Mr. Lincoln's case, an analyst from the crime lab testified that hair from a blanket at the crime scene matched Mr. Lincoln's hair. DNA determined that the hair could not have come from Mr. Lincoln. And one of the victims in the case advocated tirelessly for his release. It didn't go anywhere, or actually we litigated these issues, but we're not able to secure a release for Mr. Lincoln. And then in June in 2018, on his last day in office, Governor Greitens commuted Mr. Lincoln's sentence to time served and released him. So he walked out of prison a free and innocent man, but until his conviction's overturned, it's not a just outcome. Justice has been denied to Mr. Lincoln. However, here he is, water skiing. It hasn't stopped Mr. Lincoln from living life to the fullest, that's for sure. So as I said, with forensic science, the National Academy of Sciences has looked at forensic science and says, with the exception of DNA, no forensic method's been shown to have consistent and reliable certain results that can say that this tire track came from that vehicle or this bullet came from this gun. And that also translates to a lack of reliable error rates. So we don't know how often we're wrong. So we've got that issue with forensic science. And then we have another issue that we're learning more about that comes to us from the field of neuroscience. And that's the concept of cognitive bias. So because analysts at the crime lab are human beings and they use their human brains to make decisions, they can be influenced by case information and contextual information. And so if you all will bear with me, I'd like to do a little illustration of what this kind of contextual bias might look like. So when you look at this image, and you can raise your hand in your little square if you want, or just note to yourself, what do you see?
13.
13 or a B?
Yes, 13.
B.
That's right. So then, of course, depending on what's around it, you know, in this instance, it looks like a B, and in this, it looks like a 13, but it's the same image. And another example would be here with these orange circles. What do you notice about them?
They're the same size.
Yes, exactly. They're the same size. So I'll just go back to it. So the thing that makes this kind of bias so important to look at and to address based on evidence and based on science is that you can't fix it by wishing it was different. So we have to change lab procedures to protect lab analysts from mistakes. And there are, I should say there are many kinds of bias, and this particular type we're talking about is not misconduct. It's a functioning of the brain, but it can still have really devastating effects to an innocent person's case. So now we can talk about some of the things we're trying to do to reform some of these problems. We have an idea about how to best do eyewitness procedures so that they're more accurate, and that is to present them in scenario where neither the officer nor the witness knows which person in the lineup is the suspect. The witness is told they don't have to pick anybody. The composition of the lineup, the fillers, like you see on the crime shows, everybody in there should look like what the witness describes, not like what the suspect looks like. And then we need to get a sense of how confident the witness is about what they've seen, and then document. Kansas, you all passed reform in 2016 with the help of law enforcement, which is cool. Missouri's tried to pass reform and failed. As far as to address false confessions, we recommend that all custodial interrogations be recorded and the entire interrogation be recorded. And we also would recommend that there be jury instructions when if they believe that the confession be disregarded if they believe it was coerced. And as Joyce mentioned, Mr. McIntyre, and this is governor at the time, Governor Coyler. Say it again.
Collier.
Thank you. With compensation for exonerees in Kansas. So the Innocence Project recommends that we compensate exonerated people immediately after they're released for a fixed sum, and provide reentry funds and access to job training, education, health, and legal services. So yes, good job, Kansas. This is one of the best bills in the nation. It provides $65,000 per year of wrongful conviction and $25,000 for each year of time wrongfully spent on parole. There's also non-monetary benefits like housing, tuition assistance, financial literacy training, counseling, and expungement of the wrongful conviction. In Missouri, if you're exonerated through DNA, you're eligible for $50 a day of wrongful convicted time if it's filed within 1 year of your release. Nebraska, you're eligible for damages if you're found to proximately result from wrongful conviction with a maximum of $500,000. Arkansas, no compensation law. And Iowa, as long as you didn't plead guilty, you're eligible for $50 a day for your wrongful conviction, and lost wages up to $25,000 for the year. So still a long way to go to help correct injustice for people that have been wrongfully convicted. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that you can add MIP to your Smile account. So 5 purchases come to Midwest Innocence Project.
Temple Israel objects to that. Trust me, we have much smaller base of donors than you do.
Right.
Release
So
Rabbi Cukierkorn.
talk to your rabbi before doing anything crazy.
Exactly.
That is one thing. And always please feel free to follow our work on our website, Facebook. And that's my work email and number. You're welcome to contact me that way, but you all probably have my personal info.
Summer, I have a question.
Yes.
About the history of the Innocence Project.
Yes.
My idea is that the guy who initiated the Innocence Project was originally attorney for O.J. Simpson.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
And my sense of it, and I'd like to check that out with you, is that he felt guilty about having gotten exonerated a guy who was really guilty. And so he tried to compensate for that by finding people who are falsely convicted. Maybe you could add something to that story.
I think what's important to remember is that everybody deserves a really good defense if they're charged with a crime, and that the job of the defense attorney is to hold the state accountable. And so the quality of evidence put forth to try to convict somebody should always be scrutinized by the defense. And I think that in defending anybody, that's what a good defense attorney would do. And so, obviously I can't speak to anybody's internal motives, but I would say that what innocence work shows is that this type of thing can happen much more easily than we think it can. So in that sense, I think that the work that's being done to show how many people are actually convicted of crimes they didn't commit will have, like, that information we can use all over the criminal justice system to try to better understand what goes wrong, and to even think about, what wrongful conviction is in the sense of sentencing. So, like if you're regardless of sentencing laws, you could be convicted of something and sentenced to something that is that's wrong. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but I don't see anything I think a good defense attorney defends their client, is what I would say.
Yeah.
Sir?
Yes.
John here. What is your own background? How did you come to be working in this project?
So my bachelor's degree is in fine art, and I came to this work sort of in a roundabout way. When I graduated from the Art Institute here in Kansas City in 2005, I stuck around Kansas City, and over the next, I guess, 4 or 5 years after that, I'd been curious about it all along, but I'm wondering how come it is that so many people are killed in Kansas City. We have a homicide rate that is notoriously high and seems to have stayed high over the years. And to answer that question, sort of, I think in part because I was trained to think like an artist, I was like, well, who has access to that information? The police. So I started doing ride-alongs, which, if you can pass a basic background check, and not during COVID, I encourage people to do. You can do a ride-along with a police officer, and I did many of those to try to observe, what's going on in criminal justice in the city. And then I eventually got a position at the crime lab as a volunteer, and I did that for a few years, and they gave me, once in a while, I'd get an interesting assignment for that and really try. And then I got a full-time job there as the case coordinator for the homicide section. So then I was going to crime scenes and working with detectives. And after I was done with that, I met the director, or the legal director at the time of the Innocence Project, and started volunteering there, and then got a full-time job. And I've been there for, I guess, a little over 5 years now. And I'm working on my master's in criminal justice and criminology.
Thank you.
Yeah. A nonlinear story. I'm not an attorney, so that's sometimes
Summer, how is the Innocence Project funded?
Donations. Mhm.
Okay.
And grants.
And,
Yeah, and all of us are independent, so each affiliate is independently funded.
so the reform laws in Kansas, those were recently updated, is that right?
Are you aware of a more recent one than what I have in my slide? That is possible.
No, I know nothing about it.
Yeah.
So,
a lot of them are recent. Or the ones I touched on today. I think there was one.
There may not be a way to answer my question. Do you think that the reform of those laws in Kansas, how soon will you see the effect of them in terms of people, not as many people being wrongfully convicted? I probably didn't explain very well what I mean.
That question makes sense to me. And if I understand it right, it would be if, as we make these reforms, how soon would we see improvements? Is that right?
Yes.
I think reform, just to to speak on it generally, I think a reform law to procedure would have effect, I think, as soon as the updated procedure goes into practice. And, I think a good analogy for a wrongful conviction is an airplane crash. So it's often not just one thing that goes wrong, it's a series of mistakes that get missed with a catastrophic consequence. But anytime you can correct a big piece of it, like eyewitness identification or, recorded interrogations, that kind of thing, then you improve the practice and reduce the number of wrongful convictions would be the hope.
And what kind of success rate does your group have? I mean, is that something that you track? Like how many cases you have and what percentage of them you were able to bring justice for the incarcerated person?
We do, as far as the ratio of people that we're ultimately able to help, since I've been there, we've a lot of people. This is not a correlation. It's not that when I showed up, people started getting out, but as I've been there, I've seen us exonerate, or I've seen people become exonerated through the course of it. And they're all on a lot of our the former client stories are on the website. My experience has been that it takes a lot, like we go through a number of processes before someone's finally released. So it's possible to lose an appeal and lose an appeal and lose an appeal before someone's finally exonerated. So that is kind of difficult to quantify.
Thank you.
Do you find that many of your clients, if they had just had adequate legal representation, would have never been convicted in the first place because of how few people they have in the pre-legal aid departments in each state and how poorly they're paid, and that there's no money for them to get labs done or any investigations? And what I observed in court on many occasions was the first time that a defendant sees their pre-legal aid lawyer is the day that they arrive in court. They have to be introduced to them. They've never met them before, and the first thing they do is talk to them about a deal. If you want to plead guilty, I can get you a deal. If you want to go have your case go forward, then this is what you can probably this is what you might get. And when the deal sounds a lot better than what the attorney tells them they might get, a lot of them take the deal. you know, even if they're not guilty.
Yeah, I think those are two great points. The first one being how critically important a good indigent defense is. So anybody who's been accused of a crime can have their case properly investigated and their innocence, have a proper case put forth that could establish their innocence. So for those that, you know, can't afford a private attorney, that those resources are really important, both for, like you said, legal aid, but also for public defense. And I think Missouri, for instance, is or was at least one of the worst.
It is. It's one of the poorest in the country.
And so ineffective assistance of counsel is an issue that often comes up in a case like this. But I think your second point is also important, which is that somebody who's facing a serious prison time may decide that it's worth it to plead guilty to something that they didn't do to reduce or in order to receive a lesser sentence. Rather than go through a trial wherein they may not be properly represented.
And then they also hold them, you know, if they don't have money for bail, then they hold them in jail until their court date, which you know, totally denies them their right to a speedy trial.
Right. Are there any other questions I can answer for folks, or anybody else have a comment?
It really is. It's true pursuit of justice. We're very proud of you.
Thank you.
We question your choice of temples, but the career, well.
I don't question my choice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm really glad for the opportunity to get to speak to you all about our work.
We're so glad you joined us. We wish we had an opportunity to get to know you better before the shutdown. I think we saw you once or twice, and then we all went into lockdown. It's like we've been in lockdown.
Right.
That's what she likes us. She doesn't get to know us enough.
I'm around, and I will be.
Good. Really look forward to that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, folks, next, I was debating here with President Scheinman. There will be a program like this. It's going to be next month. We have the month decided. We have the day, well, we have the day of the week decided, Saturday and the time, 7. We don't have the day yet. And we have the speaker, which is Edgar Lozano from, Mendes Lozano from Neiva, Colombia. Okay, so thank you again. Thank you for being there. Thank you for participating. Oh, somebody wrote, let's see if people wrote stuff. Wait just a minute. Okay, that's okay. Anyway, that's it. Again, thank you very, very much. Thank you for participating. It's wonderful to have all these people here from abroad, from Mexico, from Brazil, from...
And there's somebody from San Quentin.
San Quentin, yes. That's it.
Kansas City, Missouri.
Kansas City, Missouri, the exotic lands, yes. Okay, folks.
And by the way, I hope you all recognize the brilliance of Len having appeared upside down at age 99 to entirely take that in an inversion position.
Yes, it's like
inversion therapy.
Inversion therapy, yes.
Yes. Okay, folks, again, good job. Keep coming back. Thank you. Good week. Shavua tov. Behave yourselves. Bye.
Thank you, Summer.
Thank you again, Summer.
Thank you, Summer. It was excellent.
Thank you all.
It's information everybody needs to know. It really is, because it's scary that it can happen to people.
It absolutely is, yes.
You know, I can't think of anything worse. I mean, going to prison would be bad enough, but going to prison or being on death row for something you didn't do, how horrible, you know, that is. Doing God's work.
And as always, we only can see the top of Joyce's head.
Can you
Oh,
see me?
look.
I can't see any of you. I lost the picture. Can you
Oh.
still see me?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay. So
All
be
right.
well.
all right.
Come
Bye.
back.
Aye.
Come back
Shavua
anytime.
Shavua Tov.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
I got another bouquet.